This is the first episode of Born to Innovate, and it's a bit iconic for me because Chris Savage, who I've got as the co-founder of Wistia, is someone who I've actually interviewed in the past, and we had a great chat, and I couldn't start this with anyone else. So, Chris, without further ado, co-founder and CEO of Wistia, thanks for coming onto the show.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. It's good to be chatting again. It's been too long.
So, Wistia, for those who don't know it, is a platform that's specialized in video creation, distribution, and measuring analytics and other data points. But before we kind of get into that and your kind of entrepreneurial journey, tell me about pre-Wistia going to Brown University and what you kind of did after that.
So I was a student who I didn't really know what I wanted. And Brown is a place that they call it the open curriculum. So you could basically make your own major. Which everyone likes to make fun of, myself included. And I thought it was going to be a lot of different things at Brown. I thought I was going to do computer science. I thought I was going to do psychology. I thought I was going to do econ. And then eventually I had this moment of like, I look like in hindsight, like I actually, at the beginning of my college career, like I didn't understand how to work hard. And I had never worked on things that I was also really passionate about. You know, I was kind of like, you go through high school, you know, I had done really well, but I was like a procrastinator, and I did pretty well relatively easily in high school. And that hit me like a ton of bricks when I was in college of like, oh, you can't do that. Like you have to work hard. Like, you know, if you don't work hard, you don't do well. Yeah. And it was funny because it was this moment like middle of college between my sophomore and junior year that I finally gave myself permission to do what I actually want to do. Like I wanted to make movies. I wanted to make films, and I that had always been a dream, and I had never admitted it because it seemed too ridiculous. It seemed too like, how will I make a career doing that? Like I shouldn't do that. And a lot of my friends were like really surprised when I said I was going to do this, because I was so afraid to share the truth that like that was actually what was in my core. That's what I wanted. And so but I did it. I decided I have to go for it. And this weird thing happened. Like I loved it, and it was really hard. And I started doing extra work. Like, you know, I was working on films, and we were shooting with film back then. And so you had to load the film in the canister, and, you know, the 16 millimeter film. And if you loaded it you do it in a black bag, and if you expose it to any light, then you ruin it, and it's expensive. And so like, I would just like go and I'd take the stuff and I'd practice over and over and over and over. And I started going to my professors, like asking more questions and asking for more stuff. And I started signing myself up for internships. And I became so passionate about it that I really learned how to work hard. And It didn't feel like work. It was the first time in my life, other than playing video games, I think, where like I was so passionate about what I was doing that I couldn't stop myself from doing it. And worked on some really cool projects, and, you know, started as an intern on a feature-length documentary that we ended up getting to theaters, and had this incredible experience, and really just connected. Like, if you're passionate about something, you can then work hard on it. And if you're good at it, it's also easier to be passionate. And like a small team can do big things. Like this documentary I worked on was really like 4 people, and yet we made a feature-length documentary. We got into film festivals. We won a bunch of the film festivals. We got into theaters. We got onto PBS. Like it won an Emmy, all this stuff. And it was like this tiny little team, but everyone really cared and was really excited and passionate. And like when I look back on it, it's like, of course, I was actually being exposed to a version of a startup, but I didn't understand that at the time. But I was addicted to that feeling and that experience of like working on things that excite you.
What do you mean you felt like it was like a startup, as in the sense you were kind of creating something out of nothing, or which component?
It was every day, what should we do? You know, there was like a film, and there was a script, and, you know, the way that it worked back then, and this is similar to how it works now, but we shot all this footage, and then we'd transcribe it, and then we'd take the transcriptions and we turn it into a script, and we try to get the script right, and then we'd go back to the video and we'd pull all of the copies of the original, because we didn't want to, like, you know, at that time, if it wasn't digital, so you would ruin the tape if you went through over too many times. You take all that stuff and you put it together, and be like, what does this feel like? What does this look like? And then it's like, oh, I have an idea. You know, I remember one of the things was we were doing a little bit of motion graphics, and I was like, hey, I bet we could tell some of these stories, and I could take some of these archival photos and I could add motion to them, and like this could be more compelling and interesting. And so I asked the filmmaker, should I do that? Like she's like, yeah, you should. I'm like, cool. So it's like, I had an idea, suggested it. She told me to do it. I did it, and it got in the film. And it was just that feeling of you wake up and you don't know what to do. And that's part of the fun of a startup is like, it's terrifying too. Sometimes like, what do I do? But on the other side, if you wake up and you don't know what to do, you could do anything. And I think it was that realization. And, you know, when I think about like building a company today, this sounds really nerdy, but I have said this before, like, which is it's almost like building a business. And when you have so much optionality in front of you every morning, like what should we do? What should we build? How should we serve customers? What changes should we make? How can we solve these problems creatively? Like it's almost an art form. I hate to even, it's just scary to say that out loud, but that is like that creative problem solving is one of the most motivating things to me. And so the idea that you have that flexibility, like it was true there with the film, and it's totally true with Wistia. And a lot of the people I know who are the most passionate about their businesses, that's what the rush is. You actually don't know what to do and you just figure it out.
And so how do you go from, because you mentioned it's an art form, and I think people would look at kind of tech startup versus video producing as two very different things, where video production, highly creative, tech startup, I think people would assume there's not a huge amount of creativity to that, which I know there is, and I know a lot of founders have realized there is. How do you make that decision to go
there's
from...
so much. How do I make the decision? Yeah. Well, I mean, so, you know, the full story of this film, you know, I went to school and I got my degree and, you know, made all these short films myself. And I worked on a few different, you know, commercials and I was just trying to get my hands into whatever I could.
Yeah.
But this feature-length documentary was the biggest thing I was working on. And I watched what it felt like to like basically realize at the time we were trying to get distribution for it. And we were talking to HBO, who at the time was like the leading documentary distributor. They're still one of the leading ones, of course, but there's all the streamers now. So you could put it on Netflix. Like that didn't exist. Like you could put it didn't exist the way that it does now on any of the other platforms today. But back then you couldn't. And so we were trying to figure out how to get distribution for this thing. We got to the head of the documentaries at HBO, and they're like, "This is a great movie. You guys did an amazing job." Like, but it's about a politician. We had a documentary about a politician last year. Like, you know, we don't think it did that well. So we're not going to be doing more stuff on like political figures right now. And I realized that we'd spent years of work on this. And one person on one day who was the gatekeeper was making the decision as to whether or not like more people would see this. And that actually like really kind of soured me on this. I was like, I don't know that I want to be in a world where you could spend years on a project and one person could shut it down, like one gatekeeper. Like I want something else. And that was in my mind. And then I watched YouTube. Basically, I graduated from Brown in 2005. YouTube launched in 2005 after I graduated. I was on it really early. I was paying close attention to it. And the key insight I had about it was that anyone could upload anything and it would just work. But up until that moment, that's not how online video worked. Like you had to be actually pretty technical to get online video to look good and to be playable by everyone. And so my co-founder, Brendan, and I, good friends in college, we always schemed on things. We started talking. We're like, hey, this is going to change. Like online video is about to change. It's changing because of this encoding. It's changing because of higher bandwidth. And YouTube is using open source tools to do the encoding of the video so that anyone could watch it. We're like, hey, we could do this too. And if we're right, and like online video really is here and broadband is here, there's gonna be tons of opportunities. So like, let's jump into this space. And so I got really excited about being on a really small team. You know, I'd been on the small team with the film, and I got excited about kind of owning our destiny, and also that there wasn't a gatekeeper. Like no one could stop us from putting stuff on the web. And you know, we just kind of convinced ourselves, as you often do, like just to start. Like starting is often the hard part. It's like you have a great idea, but you try to make it perfect before you do it. And people fall in that trap all the time. And they have the idea and they try to sell it to their friends and family, and it's not being sold completely. And like, I think if you were to go back and ask our friends and family at the time, like, will we be successful? I mean, I would assume some of them would have said yes, but probably most of them would have said, no, I don't think so. But like, they'll probably learn something. You know, it was like, they weren't necessarily convinced. Actually, they definitely weren't convinced at the beginning. But with just being in the game and having to figure out how to make money and having to figure out how to get customers and how to build a product and how to market yourself, all this stuff, it was like about a year before we started getting customers and figured out what Wistia was actually going to be, which again, in hindsight, feels really fast. And back then felt really slow. But it was just being in the game that mattered.
Yeah, of course. YouTube comes out in 2005. Wistia gets released in 2006. What's the gap in the market that you're chasing?
It was just this belief that there was not only going to be one video thing, and that video, once people open their eyes to a new technology of what's possible, then all these other applications start to make sense. So the first version of what we built was not at all what Wistia is today. It was a filmmaking competition website. And so we thought, hey, like, brands can sponsor competitions and filmmakers can compete. This is like directly on my own experience. There was a movie called Slither. There was a horror movie that came out in like 2005. And they released a bunch of footage and they said, whoever makes the best trailer for this wins like 40 grand and we're going to use the trailer. And I saw that competition right after I'd been working on the documentary. And I'm like, wow, I should do this. And then as I was doing it, I was realizing if I win this, this will be better for my career than the feature-length documentary was. Because the feature-length documentary was seen by, in person, maybe 1,200 people, 1,500 people across the different festivals. And then it was also seen in theaters. I don't know the numbers on that, but it's not huge numbers because it's self-distributed. And then this trailer, I was like, if you win this trailer competition, you're going to be a national ad and you'll be able to say, I made this national ad. And that was a funny thing to realize that would be better for my career, because also the competition was over like a week-long period. And so we're like, hey, let's start something around that. And then, it didn't take us that long to realize, like, wait, we have none of the connections to the brands. Why would they do this on our platform versus doing it with other things? And so we started evolving the idea, but because we told everyone we were starting, because we jumped into it, because I had stopped doing all my other jobs and my co-founder Brennan had quit his job. It was like, we'd burned the boats, we were in it. And once you're in it, you really want it to work. So you just start pivoting and you figure it out.
So, you start the business in mid 2006, and then I think it's early 2008, January 2008 is when you raise your first kind of capital at that point. What happens during those 18 months? Is that where you're kind of pivoting rapidly between these different ventures or these different ideas?
Yeah. So the first year is extremely rapid pivoting, probably too rapid. There were things that I thought were failure that were massive success, but I didn't have the experience to know that. We built a job site for filmmakers and creatives. We launched a portfolio website for filmmakers and photographers and artists. We were getting like 500 people using it monthly, building their portfolios, sharing access to this. And obviously since then, like a couple of years later was like Behance and all these other things that came out. But we were just a little early on that. We weren't getting the adoption that we wanted. And we also realized when we really started thinking like how the reality of how will we make money, you're doing the math and you're like, well, if I have 50,000 people using this portfolio website and I put ads on it, I'll make like $2,000 a month or whatever the number was. And we're like, we're going to be screwed. Like, we're never getting to 50,000. Like, it's not happening. And like, so what happens if we get to 2,000? We're making $50. Like, it's not going to work. And part of that was we had actually made some things that went viral back then. We had a project that was called ironingtheflag.com. And it was just a funny domain that we had. We thought it was just kind of, I don't even know why we bought it. Brett and I were just having a conversation one day. Like, oh, it's kind of interesting. Or maybe that could be like a political thing. And then we were having some other random conversation. And it was like, wait, how long? We were in the Iraq War at the time. We're like, how long have we been in the Iraq War? Is it longer than World War II? And we look it up. And we were 3 days away from being in the Iraq War longer than we had been involved in World War II. We're like, wow, that's crazy. So we turned ironingthefly.com. We just stopped everything else we were doing. And we spent like 2 days, a day, turned ironingthefly.com into a countdown until we had been in Iraq longer than World War II. So it was like 2 days to go. And, you know, this is also the first time I've read it. Front page of Reddit, front page of Hacker News, front page of Dig. People started writing articles about this. Like major news publications started covering this story. And so we get tons and tons of traffic to the site. You know, it's like the first day was like 50,000 visitors. The second day was like 100,000 visitors. And now remember, we have nothing else at this point. So we've gone viral at a time that like, can't even believe it's happening. An idea that took 2 days to put together. And we're like, wow, we got to make money. We got to put ads on this. So we put ads on it. And of course, this is nothing close to the traffic you need to make like a viable business. So it was like, put the ads on. I think we made like $80 in ad revenue. And it was from Google AdSense. And so like, you couldn't even cash out unless you hit $100. So like, we never got the money. And it was just this example of like, we just went viral and that's not even close to good enough. And it was a different time in terms of how people were going to look at something and what have you. But it was like these realizations that were occurring that were making it more clear to us. Like, hey, we're going to need to charge for a subscription. We're going to need something that's really valuable for customers. And it was about that time as we were trying all these different things. We had the portfolio website that we ended up connecting with a medical device company that basically needed a private way to share video. They were sending DVDs around the world and they wanted a secure and private way to do that. We were actually thinking about building that into our portfolio site. So we talked to them. They seemed interested. We made up so we had no product for them. We made up a price just completely out of thin air that we typed on a piece of paper. It was like a light plan, a medium plan, a heavy plan. It was like $100 a month, $200 a month, $400 a month. We went into a meeting with them, told them we'd give them this private way to share videos because we did have the video thing working. We had video hosting working at this point.
Yeah.
And they're like, and we're like, here's the price. And they said, well, why don't we pay you as consultants? We're like, nope, this is our business, our product. Like, you'll pay us a subscription. The guy looks at the piece of paper. It's like, whoa, I mean, if these prices, I'll take the heavy plan, which is $400 a month. And I'm like, this might work. And so then we spent 2 weeks and we built the first version of Wistia for them. They saw it, solved the problem. Great. And it just evolved from there. So it was like, that was the first year. That was like summer of 2017 that we started to get this figured out. And then really quickly, we were talking to massive companies. We're talking to Cirque du Soleil. We were talking to large telecommunication companies. We're talking to large production companies. And we're like, oh my God, this private secure thing, it's going to be big. And we actually, there was no one else to compete with. We were essentially competing with DVDs being sent around. And we're like, we can do this, but we're going to need help. And that's what caused us to raise money. And that's also what caused us to hire our first 2 people, was like trying to bring help in faster.
Yeah, got it. I mean, that's crazy. I think it seems like there are kind of 2 things that really stand out to me from a founder's perspective. The first is the fact that even with the website that you created, the Countdown website, you've got a situation where it's literally just stemmed from a conversation that you're having with Brendan in the office. And you're allowing people to tap into that conversation and that thought process. And it's something that's kind of just so genuine, but at the same time, genuinely interests people because it interested you guys and bringing people into that universe, which is actually pretty cool. And then
it was crazy. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And at the same time, you've got this, I guess, this tech product that you built, which is, as you mentioned, I think people don't realize that long ago, still open source code, something that people are reluctant to use now or hesitant to use, or some founders say, I want to build everything from the ground up. It's like, wait on, like all this stuff's out there. Why build it yourself? How much, when you got that project with a medical device company, how much of the code was already written and it was just a matter of kind of building that last piece?
It was probably like we took the hosting and encoding code that we had built that was really this layer on top of the open source stuff. And we'd connected it with like CDNs and stuff like that. Like, I'll never forget our first CDN contract. We said, we want to pay per gig. And they're like, no, usually we do a commitment. I'm like, no, we're going to have a lot of volume. We want to pay per gig. Like, okay. And the price per gig back then was like 40 cents or something for bandwidth. And our first bill was 23 cents. and we paid them like dollars a month for years and years and years. It was pretty funny. But it probably 50% of it was written. It was just once we knew this very directed thing, it's like, all right, we need projects you can put videos in. You need access control on the projects. You need people that you can give access to. You need logins and passwords. That's basically it. But it's very easy, I think, to underestimate, like, if you're solving a real problem for somebody, you don't need all the bells and whistles at the beginning to prove whether or not it works. Like, if you're going into a really hyper competitive space, yes, you got to be 10x better. But at that time, 10x better than DVDs is pretty easy.
Yeah.
But I will say, this reminds me of something else, though, which is like, in terms of other things I didn't realize, it was pretty fast. Like, we talked to the medical device company, and 2 weeks later, they're a paying customer. And 3 months later, we have like 5 paying customers. And they're names that people know. That was fast. The other thing that's crazy for me when I look back on it is that portfolio website. This is in 2005. We're like, how will we market this? I was like, I will write a blog. And what will I do? I was like, I will release 2 posts a day that are on like creative news. And I did this, and we got to like 5,000 subscribers to this blog. And we thought it was tiny, and we sucked because we had no idea. And like, again, in hindsight, like at that time and what we were doing, I had grown this like basically effectively massive audience very quickly. And I had no concept of like perspective to understand. Like, I assumed we'd have millions quickly. So I was disappointed, when the truth is, like, probably if that had just kept by itself, we would have created the largest, blog on creative news that exists. And it would have turned into a massive media site by itself. And it's just like one of those things that it's hard to see sometimes in the moment, which I think is also like advice I'd give to others. Like, if you're in these early stages and you're trying to figure out, like, is there something here or not, you should really connect with other founders who have been through this before and ask them, like, do these numbers seem good or not? Does it seem like I'm onto something or not? Because like, you need if I'd had the perspective of someone who had been through this before, I would have looked at that opportunity totally differently. And instead I thought it was a failure because of the perspective we came in with.
Yeah. The pricing that you came up with when that medical device company turned around and said, hey, we're going to go for the most expensive option, were you kind of thinking, oh shit, maybe we didn't price this too much? Like, how did you go through that process?
We thought we had underpriced. I should also mention, because we were living in a 10-person house, Brendan and I were both living in the same house. All our friends were there. We had no office. And because we were splitting food with all of our roommates, the total expenses for Brendan and I at that time, total monthly expenses, was $1,600 a month. So the first customer covered a quarter of our expenses, which was amazing. But yes, we were like, oh, we've underpriced. So then the next deal I had was with, I'll just say, a large production company. And we went in, and they were really excited. They wanted to use it. They said, what's your price? We had the piece of paper, but I thought we were underselling. So I just blurted out $2,500 a month. And they're like, well, I thought this was going to be a few $100s a month. That's way too expensive. I don't have the budget for that. I'm sorry, guys. Like, you need to go. And I tried to like right the ship, and I was like, no. We could come up with something else. And they're like, no, you don't need to do that. I understand. Like, this is your business. And they just like basically shuttled us out the door, and I didn't have the skills yet. It's like, manage that relationship. So yeah, I thought we'd underpriced. So the next person I went to, I literally said like a price that was thousands of dollars a month more, and they did not like it.
So you're kind of A/B testing with your audience in real time.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, got you. Oh, geez, that's crazy. And so that initial price point obviously seemed too small. The second price point seemed too large. I assume you just gradually refined by kind of getting somewhere in the middle where you didn't get the pushback.
Yeah, and I think what I've learned about pricing since then is, like, if you get no pushback, you're priced too low. If you are, if you're getting some pushback, that could be a sign you're at the right price. And you have to look at, like, really, what are the metrics? What are the value metrics in your pricing? Why do people spend more? And are those properly aligned with the value that the customer is getting? And the ideal pricing is something that is basically, as they get more value from the product, they pay more, but it doesn't deter them so much from using your product that they ultimately don't expand or don't get enough value. And the other thing I would say is, the simplest way to think about it is, like, pricing a product is a feature of the product. So I'm sitting in front of a MacBook. It's like an M1 MacBook. It costs like probably $1,500. This is a great computer. I love this computer. It's really great. I can have tons of stuff up. I can drive many different Zoom windows and notes and all these different things at the same time. If this computer costs $100, this would be the greatest computer that was ever created. And if this computer costs $10,000, it might be one of the worst. And if it was $100,000, it would be the worst. And I think we forget with products that the price is part of it. It is a feature. And so you just have to think about it like that when you're trying to get your pricing right. And it's hard. I mean, pricing also changes because the market changes. But when I think about it, the simplest way I can think about it is like it changes what this computer is, and it will change what your product is too. So you just need to think about those trade-offs and try to make your best guess.
The kind of process of, I guess, working out the technology component of things, I assume would have been challenging, particularly in the early stages. I mean, I believe you did go through kind of, some of the courses that you studied at Brown were kind of in the technology or software space. But given you had Brendan, who was kind of more focused on the
Brendan was the reason why we got through all of that. Brendan was the reason. I mean, it was not me. I think the thing that I came from was like, I grew up in like an early adopter household. I don't really know how else to put it. Like my dad is a computer science professor, and he would get the newest thing, and he was always excited to show it to me and share it with me. And like, we would talk about like if this newest thing was good or not. And I remember the day we got a PlayStation. I remember the day we got the Bose Wave radio, which is like this little radio that has this really incredible sound and like all these types of things. And I grew up around that, and I grew up gaming, and I was like, okay designer at the time. That's really fallen off for me, but at the time it was okay. But Brendan was the reason. And I had, and I still have unreal confidence in Brendan. That's like, if there's some massive technical challenge, like he can figure it out. And a lot of my experience when we were in college was working on interesting projects together where Brendan would just like, come in blank slate, nothing, and figure it out. And he made a product completely himself in college for fun. That was a blogging platform. It was the first blogging platform I ever saw. We never opened it up so anyone else could use it. It was just for us. But he built the ability to like publish and get subscribers and all these emoji reactions. And he designed every single emoji at the time. It was insane. It was ridiculous. But it was clear to me that working on a problem together, like we could figure it out.
How much as the non-technical founder amongst the two of you, how much were you kind of required to get across the technology? Did you find that to be challenging? Or was it kind of, that was something that you left in Brendan's domain, you could trust him to handle it, you became kind of familiar or educated at a high level so that you could talk to it with customers, but beyond that, you didn't need to?
Yes. I became very familiar and very high level. And like, there's a lot of things I've learned about how to scale a product and engineering organization and what types of things are possible to build and what types of things aren't possible to build. But there was a moment early when we were like, man, we're going slow. Do I need to learn to code? And Brendan was like, I don't want to build something that no one's going to know about and no one's going to use. He's like, no, you should not do this. Like we should keep things divided in terms of our ownership. So from of who's doing what. So from the very, very beginning, it was like Brendan owns product and what we're building, and I own the market and how we're getting to market and what the story is. And it's crazy how much that decision has had like rippling positive effects over the years by just being really simple about who owns what.
In terms of, I guess, product releases that have transpired since the original Wistia was released, you've had a number of different products that you've created. What has been the process that you've gone through in terms of identifying new product market fit and then releasing and testing and everything like that? I mean, that first year, as you mentioned right at the start, seems, you could pivot really fast. You could fail aggressively and it wouldn't really matter, right? But you kind of fast forward and got a functional business with cash flow, with investors, with, with staff who, depend on you guys. How is it that at that point where the risk is considerably higher just by virtue of the added responsibility, how is it that you guys then go out there and say, all right, here's a new product, let's try it, but let's also be cognizant of our different circumstances at the moment?
Yeah, so I think when I look back on it, there's certain moments where we really leaped forward in the product. One of the key moments was the first few years, we were not making videos ourselves. We were helping people share video privately. We didn't have that problem. Like Brent and I were in the same room. There was no, there was no need for us to be sharing video privately. I did have the understanding, having edited all this content in the past. And, there was a moment when I was editing a different movie, and every day at the end, I would export it onto a DVD, and I would go to FedEx and I would ship it. And I understood that pain and that annoyance. So I understood that problem well enough that when we were building the product, I knew what it was. I knew what should be in there. But then we were just scaling with that same product, and we weren't really sure what to build next until we started making our own videos to market ourselves. And we started using our own product every day. And then it became, we're getting feedback from customers, and we're really leaning into that, which is obviously what you need to do, is listen very close to support, and how can you automate support? How can you improve the product by making it better? But we started adding videos to our website. We started making videos ourselves. We started making blog content. We started making fun videos. And, there was like a moment where we had screwed something up and we had to fix the embed. At the time, it was like, you have the video, you take the embed code, you put it on the website. But if you're not the person who owns the website, you send someone else a message, and they take the embed code and they put it on the website. Now we need to change it. So you need to give them a new embed code, and you have to blah, blah, blah. It's annoying. They're like, why don't we just make it so you can do it in Wistia? We'll just call it replace video. Very simple, basic name. So we just go in there and make it so you don't have to go get permission. You don't have to re-embed. It just works. We did that for ourselves, and we told our customers about it, and it went wild. People were so excited about this very, very simple feature. And we understood the pain so directly of not having that feature. And And so then we're going along our way, and we're doing more marketing with video, and we're trying all these different landing pages to get people to convert. And we made a landing page that looked like there was a video behind a conversion form. So it was like, if you put in your email, instead of saying submit, it said play, and then people would convert to a different page. And we did that for ourselves, and the conversion rate on that page was so high. It was like 70% of the people who hit the page signed up. We're like, this is amazing. Wait, we could put this in the product. So we put it in the product, and we were using MailChimp at the time. So we had the leads go into MailChimp, and we told we made up a name, Turnstile, for it. Like you're going through the turnstile at a Subway or something, and you're putting your ticket. These things don't exist anymore, but that's what we called it. And it just took off again. And we were like, wait, we're our own customer. That's what's happening. And then that helped empower like years of innovation, basically, of just doing it and pushing the product to its limit. And then I would say we had a while where it felt like for us to expand, the goal would be to integrate Wistia into all the other tools you use. And we'll like work our way into people's workflows. And so we did that. But the interesting thing that has happened since is that still all that stuff's still really important. We still integrate with tons of tools and make it really easy to like move leads between things and push videos into Wistia and pull videos out of things. Was this realization of, wait, there's actually this whole other class of video problems that we can help people with in our software that are around like creation and going live and editing and things that we could add more value for customers by removing steps. And so that really became clear. We launched Soapbox, which is a separate product, in 2017, I think. And we got some traction. It was like really early in the market. And then over the last few years, that became really clear. And so we started pulling all this major stuff inside the platform. And, when we do it now, it's like there's research teams and there's customer interviews, but it's ultimately, we're still using all the tools ourselves and figuring out like, we're our own customer still. And I think that's like an important part of the mix.
You guys went through a really significant transformation around kind of mid 2018. Actually, two milestones I really want to chat about, 2018 and this year, 2022. In 2018, you guys made what seems like probably the biggest decision that you guys as co-founders have made, which is instead of going through the process of an acquisition, which presumably financially would have made you very secure perpetually.
Yes.
Instead, you decided
I would never have had to work again. Yeah.
Right. And so instead, you guys made the hard decision, which seems like it actually wasn't a hard decision, to take debt instead. And so you took on $17.3 $1 million worth of debt, which is absolutely crazy. And but it's interesting. I read a bit about the kind of lead up to that, and I guess a few of the risks that you guys were taking, and that historically you've taken a lot of kind of creative risks. And kind of fast forward, you know, it seemed like you felt like you were taking more financial risks, and you'd shifted away from the creative. Can you talk to me maybe about that journey? I mean, we're talking about over a decade on from when you started Wistia.
Yes.
There's been this kind of shift.
Yeah. So basically, we thought we were missing out on revenue growth. Everyone told us, like, look, you're too profitable. Like, why are you profitable? You don't want to be profitable. Profitability is bad. Like, revenue growth is good. And one person says that to you, fine, you ignore it. But when everyone you talk to says the same thing, you start to think you're the idiot. And like, definitely like imposter syndrome, doing this the first time, not understanding how good we had it, and not understanding the link between profitability and what what it allows you to say yes to with projects, and also what it forces you to say no to. You know, when we were profitable before all this, the moment you're talking about, we would say no to things. Oh, we should do this new idea. Is it a good idea? Yeah, it seems like a good idea. Is there something we should stop doing that we should do? So we should do this instead. That's usually a pretty healthy thing to say, unless you're dramatically underinvested. That's because if you're trying stuff, some stuff won't work. That's just how it is. Well, we stopped saying no. We stopped asking that question. We said yes to everything. And externally, I was getting a lot of validation. Like, I'd go to an event, what's happening? Oh my God, we're 60 people. We're 65 people. They're like, weren't you 35 people like a year ago? I'm like, yeah, we're growing so much. We're doing this, we're doing that. It felt like really good. And everyone's like, yeah, you're the best. And what was happening though is that we had all these zombie projects that we're living on, and things that were not as, they really should have been shut down, or they should have been tweaked. They should have been changed, or you had great people on projects that weren't working. And that was just, it's basically, we started running negative. And that forced us, without meaning to, we became quite short-term. So it was like, all right, if you're going to do this thing, what's the return this month? Versus like, what's the right thing to do for the market for the next 6 months, or the next year, or the next 5 years? That was something that was very easy to talk about when we were profitable, and very, very hard to talk about when we were not. And so we were in that state, running negatively, when the acquisition opportunity presented itself. And when we decided what we would do if we sold, is that someday we'd try to go back and we'd try to build another company and not screw it up the way we screwed up Wistia. And we'd be long-term focused, and we'd be really creative. And what space would we be in? We're like, oh, we'll be in the video space for sure, because there's all this new stuff happening. We're really excited about it. Like, okay. And who will we hire? We knew the people we'd hire. What type of office would we want? What type of culture we want? We knew that. We'd just go back to building the best Wistia we could. And we're going through this whole conversation, and we realized if we sold, we'd just try to rebuild a company. And the thing we'd really regret is not fixing the business, because we already had some scale, and we had customers, and we had a great product, and we had crazy high NPS and all these things. And so that's what we realized. And it was a very freeing moment of like, oh, this is, it had been stressful running negatively, and then it was much less stressful the second we knew what we wanted to be when we grew up. And so we're like, all right, we're going to get back to profitability. We're going to be long-term, but early employees and investors wanted a return, right? I told them that. I said, we're going to sell this business someday. That's why you should join it. And, I didn't say you're going to invest and never get a cent back. Like, that was not a thing we could do. And so we thought, how can we get a return for people and set ourselves up for the future? And we hit on this idea of debt. And basically, debt would force us to be profitable to serve the debt, which can be tough at times, but ultimately forces us to be more focused. And then by being profitable, we get to be more long-term, and we get to be more creative. And so we did that deal, and it worked like unbelievably well. We got the business much more profitable than we were expecting, but also we got much more focused, and everyone knew why we were doing what we were doing. And to be clear, there's also chaos. There's a bunch of people who left. If you go look at Glassdoor, we have some terrible reviews from that moment. Wistia is a sinking ship. Don't work here. CEO sucks. Like, all this like stuff, which I actually, in hindsight, really understand. It was a very tumultuous moment and confusing, because it was so different what we did. But we got creative again. We got more long-term focused again. We started doing bigger, more interesting, more creative, like brand results, and we started growing faster. So that was the great irony, is like we became profitable again and our revenue growth accelerated. And so then the debt, which we got when we were not profitable, which is pretty expensive, and from an interest rate perspective, we were able to refinance it, get the rate really low, and it just became like much easier to manage.
Man, I've got goosebumps. So you guys are in a position where you've kind of started saying yes to everything, and what it's ultimately led to is an outcome where you've been growing, but with the wrong opportunities, and everything started falling over. You've lost track of the vision and why you actually started the business. You sit down with your co-founder, Brendan, you have a conversation about, hey, it's all come to an end. We've screwed up. How would we do things differently if we started again? And you've literally described the business that you'd created, maybe minus a few months or perhaps a couple of years where you led astray. Have I understood that correctly?
That's right.
Crazy. And so you raised the debt, the 17.3 million in July 2018. You go back to basics. You go back to, I guess, why you originally did it, focusing on creative as opposed to financial. And then about a week ago, you had, I guess, one of the most exciting product releases that I've seen from you guys in a while, which is Wistia Live.
Yeah.
How is it that, I mean, post-COVID era and everything else, I assume all of that is kind of played into Wistia Live, but this is a big product. This isn't, let's add a small feature to our existing product. This is a big product release. How did you make a decision? Well, first, maybe if you could tell the listeners what Wistia Live is, but then also tell us how you kind of got to the decision of like, that's what we want to do next.
Yeah. So Wistia Live is a really, really easy way to host a live event or webinar that looks and feels much more engaging, and that the people who put it on can feel really confident that they're putting on something that's great. And it's built into Wistia. So if you're a Wistia user, or you just do a lot of video marketing and you have a lot of content in one place, you get the benefits of it being in an all-in-one platform. So you go live, you can create the pages in Wistia, you can get the registrations through Wistia, you can tie them, of course, into other places. The reminders, all that stuff, that's handled for you. When someone comes to a live event, I'll talk about it from the backstage perspective. It's very much like you're in a Zoom meeting and you have 5 or 6 people up, but one person can control layouts of what people look like in the feed for the people who are watching the event. And so what that means is that by switching things live in real time between people and their screens, you can make something that's so engaging and compelling, and you don't have to be technical to do it, and you don't have to be a creator to do it. Like, the goal is, it is simple, it's easy, it's in the browser. And so you make something that looks better, is easy to put together, and we have a lot of tools to help you feel confident when you're actually creating the event. So we have this mode called producer mode, where if you have headphones in, someone who's backstage can talk to you, but the audience can't hear them. And so if you're getting questions, or you need people to feed you answers, or there's something that's going wrong, you can literally have someone in your ear, in the same way that, that's what like major newscasters do. So we're stealing a lot of this stuff from the news, and then from our own experience running webinars, which is like, we've done a lot of webinars and they work great. And we talked to a lot of our customers. It's still one of the most common forms of content that people make, who is Wistia customers, people doing a lot of video marketing, like webinars become a thing they do. But when we ran them ourselves, we always use this technology called OBS. We take different video feeds and put them together to make it look more compelling, but it's out of reach for most people in terms of it's too complicated. So the vision was, we want it in there, we want it to be easy. And then when the event's done, we have the analytics of how people are watching it. When the event's done, drops into your Wistia account, it's automatically recorded. We have an editor in Wistia now, so you can trim moments from it. You can cut out the awkward snafus. You can pull out the ends. You can turn it into social clips to promote it. You can publish it through Wistia. You can put it into a channel on your site. You can just embed it. You can push it to YouTube. You can push it to LinkedIn. You can put it into a podcast feed. Basically, the whole goal, by putting it in one place, for saving you all the time of like the exporting and the downloading and the confusing, like intimidating stuff. And ultimately, you feel more confident and you make something that looks more engaging. And then how do we make it, or why did we decide to do it? I mean, it's kind of simple. We talked to a lot of customers about where their content's coming from. And which is very common, that a lot of people webinars have been around forever. I mean, even the name, do you know what webinar comes from? It's like
No, tell me.
web seminar. That's terrible, right? It's horrible. But most people aren't very happy with the webinar tools that they use. And most of the webinar tools that exist they've been around for a while, and they have not done they're not video first. They're like slide first, which I understand, because at the time when they were built, like the broadband wasn't there, the camera quality wasn't there, all these like things. How are you going to make it more compelling? It wasn't something that people were asking for. But now all that stuff's there, and the webinars are just kind of like lagging behind. And so we felt like it's a big space, it's an obvious space, it's a space that we can make a unique mark in. And we saw so many ways that we could make our customers' lives easier by making it all in one. And so that's really what it became clear that we wanted to do it in 2021. And it was just, how do we do it the right way? And that's a whole other story of like things we did right and things we did wrong. But ultimately, that's where we got. That's how we got to where we are.
But ultimately, you followed the exact same, I guess, methodology that got Wistia to where it is today, which is, hey, let's focus on creating products that fill gaps that we experience on a day-to-day basis ourselves.
Yeah, it's about pain for customers. It's about time. It's like, if someone's feeling a lot of pain, how can you help them? If someone's wasting a lot of time, how can you give them the time back? If someone's trying to do something that they can't do without normally it's like really complicated to do, how do you make it simple? And it's kind of like that. This was a massive project, and it is a massive difference that you get this in Wistia. But even like how the teams are set up, we learned how to do it at scale. I know it sounds crazy to say, but like we doubled our product and engineering organization this year. Tons of hiring. And we learned how to like really be more highly aligned and more loosely coupled, so that the teams aren't checking in with us about their roadmaps, and they're not doing that. We purposely don't know certain things, all in service of going faster. And I'll give you a little example that happened just with live, since we're taping a week to the day after live launched. Yesterday at 5 p.m., there was a note that went around internally at Wistia, and I was like, oh, we just launched embedding for Wistia live events. And so what that means is you could just take the event and you can embed it on your website, or you can embed it behind a gate. You can do whatever you want with it. And it's funny because this is a feature we wanted to do before. We said we don't need it for launch. We're going to push out. Zoom doesn't have this. A lot of the other tools don't have this. And the team's like, oh, we can do it. And literally 4 business days later, it's done. It's out. Customers can use it. And so it's not only is live out, it's like, this is the first version of live, and now we're going to keep iterating from here. Same thing with our editor, which launched this summer. Keeps getting better and better and better, and we're like, the pace is accelerating. And if you're using Wistia, that's what you should expect, is that all of these things are going to keep compounding, and we're going to keep moving faster.
So like 16 years post initial inception of Wistia, you guys are still going hyper agile, releasing on a weekly basis.
Yes. And daily.
I love it.
And we were, I will say, we haven't always been in the moment that we're in right now. Like, we have had major screw ups at different points in time. We have shipped too slowly. We've made things where we weren't close enough to the customer. We were building things too far for the future. And I think ultimately the stuff that has always worked is like, you understand the customer and their pain, and then it's your job to figure out, or the opportunity for them, how do I make this so simple and easy to use that they actually can incorporate into their workflow? And if you do that, usually you have something that's valuable. But yeah, we're more agile than ever. And I think that's also the funny thing too, is like, I don't think you asked this question, but when we made our plan at the beginning for how long we would survive, Brett and I took the cash that we had, made a spreadsheet. It was going to go down each month, $1,600 a month, right? We're like, I think actually we modeled it as higher. We're like, we're going to run out of money in 6 to 8 months. And then people said, well, what will you do when you run out of money? I was like, oh, we'll sell the company. Or we'll just tell no one that we did this. Like, that was our plan.
Yeah.
And so it's very funny for me to be here 16 years later doing it. And I look at it in a different way now, which is like, I feel so lucky to get to do this. And to like, I have like the dream job of like what I would want. And actually, like, a lot of things, like, it's really hard to predict when something will happen, but it's not hard to predict if it will happen. So it's like, how do you stay in the game, and how do you stay motivated, and how do you keep working on the right problems? And that's how I look at it now. And so it's like, well, if I'm still working on, I'll probably still be working on this for the next 8 years, next 16 years. And that's exciting because like, who wouldn't want to be like building something that they believe in and doing it with great people and being really creative and all of those things. And when you think about it like that, it's like, well, yeah, some things might launch like slightly slower than you thought, or the initial reaction isn't what you hoped it would be, or whatever, but you have a long-term perspective. It's really easy to like adjust and plan. And of course, when things do have an incredible response, like Wistia Live is having an incredible response right now, it's like all the sweeter, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Chris, before we kind of close off, I've got just a way I want to kind of wrap up every episode of Born to Innovate, which is if you could go back to the very start, or maybe not because, you know, that would have changed the whole journey, but if you could give some advice to someone who is kicking off in a very similar position to yourself, so non-technical background or perhaps a bit of tech, but that's not their role. They're kicking off a tech business. It's first-time founder. If there's any advice you could give them, what would it be?
My advice would be most people don't actually put things in front of potential customers like fast enough. And they talk to their friends, they talk to their family, they talk to people who know them and who are going to root for them. That's normal. Like, you know, if you and I are hanging out, we're friends, you have this idea, it's pretty hard for me to shit on your idea. Like, that's not usually what happens. I think what you want to try to do as fast as possible is like prove out to yourself and to others that there really is something of value you can deliver. And you don't need a product to do that. It can be landing pages. It can be a deck. It can be, you know, a Figma walkthrough. It can be, you know, a no code prototype, like, but figure out how to get something actually in front of customers, because everyone's afraid of launching. It's kind of another way of saying what I'm saying, but the opposite's also true. Like, if you put it in front of people and you actually do have a unique perspective, you'll figure that out pretty quickly. And the motivation that comes from that is outrageous. And so you need to get yourself onto that path, or you need to get off of it like as quickly as possible. And so I would just try to do that faster and earlier. And I said this earlier also, but in the interview, but just reach out to people who have done it before. People reach out to me all the time, and if I'm free and it like hits the right way where I can be helpful, like I will always help. And ask perspective, like, hey, does this seem good to you? Does this seem bad? Am I ahead? Am I behind? Like, and that's it. It's just really hard to get that perspective. So I would try my best to get that perspective, because sometimes you're onto something and you don't realize it. Or like in my experience, there was a moment of like, we're having effortless growth and we thought everything we were doing was amazing. I look back on it and there was like 2 or 3 out of the 10 things we were doing that were amazing. And I wish I had understood earlier how unique those things were, because where we are now, I'm just trying to still do those 2 or 3 things. And it's like building great product and marketing it in a great way. That's basically it. And you just keep the cycle going. But it's really easy to get distracted by all these other things. And so you need perspective. You need help to make sure that like when you're figuring out what to do, you really are focused on the right activities, the right projects.
Yeah. Get feedback to the customers as soon as possible.
Yes.
Awesome. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure once again. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, and all the best with Wistia Live.
Hey, man. Thanks so much. Good to see you. This is fun. And if I can ever be helpful to folks out there, hit me up on Twitter, LinkedIn, and I'll do what I can.
Thanks, Chris.
Cool. Bye.